Good morning. I turn the lee green down gaily now and paint the meadow brown with my plough. I dream with silvery gull and brazen crow, a thing that is beautiful, I may know. Tranquility walks with me and no prayer. Tranquility walks with me and no care. Oh, the quiet ecstasy, like a prayer. I find a star-lovely art in a dark sod, joy that is timeless, O heart that knows God. That was The Ploughman by Patrick Kavanagh. The glossy flanks and manes outshone the flying splinters of the sun. The tranquil rhythm of that team was a slow-flowing meadow stream. I saw Phidias chisel there, ocean stallion, mountain mare, seeing with eyes the spirit unsealed, plough horses in a quiet field. And that poem is called Plough Horses by Patrick Kavanagh. Last week, in giving my talk, I conflated these two poems. Somehow I managed to merge them into one, and I felt a little bit, there was such a change in tempo. I wondered if I could have gotten two poems mixed up. So I looked it up and it turned out I was right. One is called The Ploughman, the first one, and the second one, Plough Horses. So a little glitch in last week's talk, but it seemed to work well at the time. There was another glitch in last week's talk. Ilya pointed it out to me. So the moon is always full, no matter where you are on the planet. I mean, when there's a full moon somewhere, there's a full moon everywhere. Yes, of course. The night before giving the talk, I had read this article about how there would be a solar eclipse on the day of the solstice, and I read it too quickly. I knew that there was a dark moon or a new moon in this neck of the woods on the summer solstice. And when I read that there would be a solar eclipse, I jumped to the conclusion that there would be a full moon, and then jumped to the conclusion that that must be in the southern hemisphere. Yes, I read it too quick, but still last week was a very auspicious occasion. to have a solar eclipse on the longest day of the year if you're in the northern hemisphere, shortest day of the year in the southern hemisphere, and to have a dark moon or new moon at the same time as the solstice. That is rare and wonderful, auspicious. But like beauty, auspiciousness is in the mind of the beholder. So far as we know, the first solar eclipse to be predicted was in 585 BCE, before the Common Era. And it was predicted by the Greek philosopher, scientist, whatever, in 585 BC. And Bertrand Russell, in his History of Western Philosophy, says, "Thus science and philosophy were born together." About 350 years after that, another Greek genius, Eratosthenes, he calculated the circumference of the earth. And he did this by trigonometry, I guess. He knew that in a certain place, the earth shone directly into a well. No, the sun shone directly into a well. So that if you looked into the well, there was no shadow. So the sun's rays at that point were perpendicular to the earth. And that was on the summer solstice. In another place, on the summer solstice, a shadow was cast so that by placing a stick in the ground, and the angle, the difference, would be caused by the curvature of the earth. And by calculating that angle, you could calculate the circumference of the earth, as long as you knew the distance between the two places, the well and the stick. So he calculated the circumference of the earth to be about 250,000 stadia, which works out at about 39,000 kilometers. And the actual circumference of the earth is more like 40,000 kilometers. Fairly accurate. And while the Greeks were making inroads into science and philosophy, using the rational consciousness that Julian Jaynes talks about in his book, The Origin of Consciousness, in the breakdown of the bicameral mind. While the Greeks were making those inroads, and so were the Egyptians. The Romans perhaps not so much, but the Indians, they were making inroads into, well, the Buddha around the same time as Thales was making inroads into the arising and fading, the cessation of dukkha. They had, prior to the Buddha's time, done a certain amount of philosophical investigation and speculation. And although rationality may solve many of our problems and make it easier to deal with a catastrophe, it may be helpful to be able to narratize quickly what is happening. There are problems and dilemmas that we face in life that rationality cannot reach. Two and 500 years ago, approximately. And that's just such a small span of human history. 20,000 years ago, I think we were struggling with a glacial period, what's commonly known or referred to as the Ice Age. Is just a glacial period in a much longer Ice Age. 20,000 years ago, humans had still not invented or discovered agriculture, at least to the best of our knowledge. That only happened about 12,000 years ago. We've been around, modern humans, they say, modern being Homo sapiens, have been around about 200,000 years. So the last 2,500, it's just such a small span of that entire time. And this rationality is a very recent development. And you can get a sense of what it was like before this if you read The Origin of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind. "200,000 years. And before that, what was life like on Earth? Still a multitude of species, plant and animal, in the seas and on the land. This current ice age started about 2.5 million years ago. And the ice age is characterized by there being an ice cap on one of the poles, possibly two, and this repeated periods of glacial periods and interglacial periods. And we're currently in an interglacial period. So it's worth asking the question, as we seem to be driving the planet into a warmer phase, will we manage to stop it or slow it down enough so that we don't go back into what is called a hothouse phase, which is the phase when you don't have a glacial age, glacial period? And will our warming of the planet defer or postpone the next glacial period? It's just speculation. But given that the Ice Age is characterized by glacial and interglacial periods, eventually we'll enter into another glacial period. And then we will have glaciers coming down from the north and rising up from the south poles and covering vast amounts of land, much of it currently inhabited land, that will become uninhabitable because of the glaciers. So maybe our warming of the planet will simply defer or postpone the next glacial period. Or maybe it will go too far and drive us out of the Ice Age that we are in and into a hothouse phase. Such vast amounts of time are interesting to speculate upon. And it gets even bigger. What happens, or what happened before the current Ice Age? If we go back far enough to about 160 million years ago, all the continents were still one massive continent, which geologists call Pangaea. And this was also the Jurassic Age. Where tropical plants were growing on the North Pole. And animals all shared, land animals all shared one landmass, and there was only one ocean. Then this landmass began to break up due to volcanic activity, earthquakes, plate tectonics. And they began to separate into what we now know as the continents. Amazing that we can figure all this out. We're possibly the first species on the planet in its 2.5 billion years of life to figure out things like this. And maybe not. about 60 million years ago, the Earth was hit with an asteroid that wiped out life on Earth almost completely. And it certainly brought an end to the dinosaurs, but it's possible they were already beginning to go extinct. I sometimes think that the amount of suffering that human beings cause to each other and to other animals might somehow be justified or redeemed if we manage to prevent another asteroid from destroying life on Earth. Then maybe the suffering we will have prevented will outweigh the suffering that we have caused. That's a very remote possibility. All our dramas unfold against a vast amount of dramas. All the animals that have their stories, their dramas, their lives, and all the humans, modern humans, in 200,000 years. And then this very recent development of science, technology, innovation. And this very recent understanding into the nature and even into the existence of dukkha. Somewhere Dogen asks about why do we practice? And there are various answers. But on one occasion the answer is because we're deluded. Or maybe it was, why do we suffer? And it's because we're deluded. And then the next question is, what about the animals? So if we take it as, why do we practice? It's because we're deluded. Then what about the animals? Are they also deluded? And can they practice? So the teacher's response was, the animals are grossly deluded. From that, we can understand that it is because of our developed consciousness that we can perceive our delusion. We can perceive the nature of life. We can perceive that life is dissatisfying, or there is a dissatisfying quality to life. Yes, on the one hand, it's wonderful and magical. But on the other hand, it pains us to have to give it up. It pains us to see other people suffering. It pains us to see our loved ones suffer and die. So we're able to articulate our dissatisfaction. We're able to philosophize about it, console ourselves, but we need consolation. To be grossly deluded is to be suffering, possibly without knowing that you're suffering. And so the Buddha applied his mind to the question of the arising and cessation of dukkha. And while Thales was coming out with his prediction, first prediction that we know of a solar eclipse, and he didn't say, I predict this will happen. He was accurate. It was a scientific prediction, not a prophetic prediction. While he was doing that, around the same time, the Buddha was saying, this world is anguished, being exposed to contact. For no matter upon which it conceives its conceits of self, the truth is always other than that which it conceives. The world, whose being is to become other, is exposed to becoming, is committed to becoming, relishes only becoming. Yet what it relishes brings fear, and what it fears is pain. Now this noble life is lived for the complete ending of dukkha. Amazing. Take the backward step, says Dogen, that shines light inward and illuminates the self. Look at what is going on the inside. What is going on the outside are shining the light into the relative world gives us a science and a technology and a wonderment true. It does not give us liberation from this sense of dukkha. Take the backward step that turns the light inward to illuminate the self. Our science and our technology, or technologies, have really made our lives more comfortable and more entertaining, and for a lot of people has taken the struggle out of existence. But it has not released us from this sense of dukkha. It may have given us enough leisure time to delve into what is dukkha, how does it arise, and how can we be liberated from it. it may have given us enough free time, enough time to be not caught up in the struggle for survival, to be able to go into these questions. In the Buddha's day, to do that, you pretty much had to leave home and give up the worldly life in order to devote yourself to this question and this practice. And it's because of the agricultural revolution that enough wealth and spare time was created to allow people to do this. But with all the entertainment value that science offers us, that technologies offer us, we can be caught in their distractiveness, their ability to distract us. We can live a life of partying, of entertainment, but ultimately that doesn't satisfy us. There's something more that we need to be fulfilled. There's a great story, a short one, and I can't remember it completely. It's one of these childhood stories, perhaps a fairy tale. And it goes something like this. There was a king who wanted to know who was the best musician in his land. And so he had a competition. And all the musicians from the far-flung corners of his land came to play for him in his palace. And most of them were just dismissed fairly quickly. And it came down to the last two. And one played such a delightful melody that the king just had to get up and dance and sing and feel wonderful. And then the next one played, and his tune or his music was so sorrowful that the king just had to weep. And he gave the prize to the second one. And the first one, who had made the king dance and sing, protested, saying, "I have made you, my music has inspired you to dance and to sing. Surely that is better than weeping and being sorrowful." And I forget the king's reply, but I think it went something like, "To weep and to be sorrowful is somehow more true." Not saying that we should go around weeping and being sorrowful, but we're getting closer to the bone in those circumstances. We're getting closer to the true nature of our existence. Somehow there's more meaning in that, well, there was for this king under these circumstances. Maybe one of you knows the story more fully and can relate it to me. As we move out of lockdown, we're presented with other dilemmas. How safe is it to go out? How much are we putting ourselves and our loved ones at risk? I feel as though Ireland has done a really great job at keeping the numbers of deaths few, small, containing it. But now as the restrictions are lifted, it feels as though people are behaving as though the crisis is over. Especially when you get sunny weather and they go to the beach. Yeah, when they're going shopping, they're taking precautions, wearing masks and so forth. But the party atmosphere can easily take over. Forgetfulness of our predicament can easily take over. And the lifting of the restrictions is not saying that it is safe. It is simply saying that we feel that whatever outbreaks there may be, we can contain them. A little bit like now that we've put out the big fire, we believe that we can easily contain the smaller fires that will break out from time to time. So there's these dilemmas that come up, and to some extent, rationality can help. We can figure out a plan, a policy for ourselves about what we're going to do, what we think is safe, what we think is not safe, how we're going to proceed. But there are areas of the heart that this rationality will not reach. There are areas of the heart that will remain unresolved. And my feeling is that only meditation or practice can address those unquieted chambers of the heart. Some time ago in San Francisco, maybe 10 years or more ago, I saw a billboard for a movie. I think the movie was Ronin, but I could be wrong. What caught me more was the rider that goes at the end. It said, "The one who knows his destiny or her destiny knows no fear." I thought that was a good one. In one sense, we know our destiny. We can say on a cosmic level, our destiny is to become Buddha. On a more practical level, we can say our destiny is to grow old, become ill, and die. Our destiny is death. To the extent that we recognize, accept, and integrate that reality, we can live without fear. I think it was Deshu Maru who said, we do this practice so that we can die without fear. We want to live without fear. And that is essentially what freedom is. But to live without fear does not mean that we live recklessly. We understand that eventually we will die. And in the meantime, we take care of ourselves and others. In the meantime, we appreciate this life. We appreciate this limited existence. Katagiri Roshi said, we do this practice. Mezumi Roshi said, we do this practice so that we can appreciate our life. Suzuki Roshi said, we should appreciate this limited life. We get to see a very small window of life on earth. Maybe 80 years. Actually, I was surprised to read that Eratosthenes lived to be 80. And we've always thought, oh, people of earlier periods lived much shorter lives. And that may be true, but some people, mostly in the aristocracy, lived longer lives, living to be about 80. So maybe we can expect to live to be 80 or 100. Maybe with advances in science and technology, we get to live to be 150, 200. These advances won't necessarily free us from dukkha. As Emily Dickinson says, narcotics or entertainment, narcotics cannot still the tooth that nibbles at the soul. Imagine your lifespan is 200 years. but you're currently 150 years old. What's the difference between that and where you are now? If you've got 40 or 50 or 60 years behind you, how's that different than having 150 years behind you? I would like to live to be 1,000, to see all the changes that take place over 1,000 years. Maybe if I lived to be 1,000, I would have enough time to do all the things that I want to do. Failing that, my only alternative is to be present. And find in that present the totality of being, the fullness of being that takes away dukkha. Destiny is like a dart of lightning, says Dogen, emptied in an instant, vanished in a flash. How are we to live? How are we to negotiate our way through this day, through this life? What is a way of life that will satisfy your heart's desire? What is it you must do to live a life that will be fulfilling? How are we to relate to ourselves, to others, and to the world? How are we to find a place where we can say, it is just so? One thing about this evolution of consciousness, James calls it the origin of consciousness, but he is talking about a particular kind of consciousness. And if my memory was better, I could remember in Buddhism there are, I think, 5 different kinds of consciousness. So one of the difficulties of our form of consciousness, which is heavily leaning towards the rational, is that it tends to create a stronger sense of separation between subject and object. So it has the advantage of being able to see more clearly and see our predicament and talk about things like the human condition. Talk about things like dukkha and speculate on the nature of dukkha and the nature of existence. It's able to do things like that. But one of the costs is that it creates an extra step of separation. So how are we not to fall into that extra step of separation? How are we to use that consciousness to achieve liberation, to become present? How are we to use that consciousness to direct our actions and our lives towards wholeness and completion? A few years ago, I took a book out of the library, which was something like talking about Heidegger's philosophy, and I only got as far as the first paragraph in the introduction. Well, maybe I got a little bit further, but that's the only paragraph I think that made sense. I forget who the author was, but he said for Heidegger, the central problem of philosophy was how to use our thinking to escape the cabinet of Cartesian consciousness. I really like that. The cabinet of Cartesian consciousness, and walk poetically upon the earth. The cabinet, what we would call the box. How do we think outside the box? But this sounds an awful lot better. The cabinet of Cartesian consciousness. Cartesian consciousness is seeing the world of space and time too rigidly. I will meet you at 3 p.m. or my train gets in at 3:05 p.m. Meet me there, and we have a precise coordinate of location and time. The Cartesian consciousness that sees the world rigidly in terms of space and time, concretely in terms of space and time, rather than what? Organically, poetically, more of a soft focus. How do we use our thinking to escape the cabinet of Cartesian consciousness and live poetically upon the earth? Somehow, living poetically upon the earth is more satisfying than living in the world of Cartesian consciousness. But is it? Take the backward step that turns your light inward and illuminates the self. And people are doing that. People are doing that in this practice period. And people are sensing the dilemmas that are being presented by the lifting of lockdown and the returning to what was normality, or taking steps in that direction. But there are parts of the heart that rationality will not resolve. It's only our connection with each other, with ourselves, and with the world that will resolve those parts. How do we come to terms with where we are? How do we accept that this is where we are? Fully, completely accept it. And from that groundedness, take a step forward. Without misgivings as to where we could have been or should have been or where we want to be. Being completely here. Occupying your life completely. Many difficulties arise in practice. But it's through our practice that we can move beyond those difficulties. Our practice somehow helps to open us up, to create more space, to include things that we could not previously include, or that we found hard, difficult, or painful to include. There is no simple answer, and yet the answer is simple. Whichever way we move, we get it wrong. And yet, there is no wrong way to move. Being told that it is impossible, one believes in despair. Is that right? Being told that it is possible, one believes in excitement. Yes, that's right. But whichever is chosen, it does not fit one's heart neatly. Being asked, what is unfitting? I don't know what it is, but my heart knows somehow. I feel an irresistible desire to know. What a mystery human is. As to this mystery, knowing how to walk with people, demonstrating and teaching, clarifying the mind. This is Buddha. this eye, seeing what the Buddha does, vows to practice, to aspire, and be resolute. Just practice right here, now, and achieve continuity endlessly, forever. This is living in vow. Herein is one's peaceful life found. What a mystery human is. Whichever is chosen, it does not fit one's heart neatly. How can you not choose? I feel an irresistible desire to know. Which one is it? A or B? But we can't know. And it's living in that unknown that we find our freedom. This practice period, I think I said it earlier on, that I would give 19 talks. And I believe this is talk number 15, which means there is 16, 17, 18, 19, 4 talks left. And I think that brings us up to the 25th of July. So we'll end the practice period on the 26th, which I think is Sunday, the 26th, or Sunday after the last talk. We will end the practice period. And when the practice period ends, we'll have an interim or a break, and then figure out what to do next. So I have added 1 or 2 things to the practice period schedule, and I sent out an email about them. You're invited and welcome to join in those events, to redouble your efforts as we come to the concluding third or so. We've entered the concluding third of our COVID practice period. I do look forward to practicing with you all in person, under the same roof, at some point in the not too distant future. And at the same time, I know that there is nothing to look forward to. Thank you all very much.